The wind hit me like a wall of ice water, and my monitor screamed a warning I already knew was coming. 40 degrees colder than an hour ago. Pressure dropping so fast my ears popped twice in 1 minute. Somewhere above the clouds, the sky lit up violet, and I counted under my breath, waiting for the sound to catch up. 3 seconds later it came, a crack loud enough to shake dust off the rocks around me. I smiled. Not because I wasn't scared. I was plenty scared. I smiled because I recognized this. This was not an alien nightmare built to break me. This was a Tuesday storm rolling in over Lake Michigan, translated into another planet's weather system, and dressed up with a fancier name. My name is Maya Whitfield, and 6 hours earlier, I had been sitting in a classroom that smelled like ozone and old metal, listening to Instructor Vian list off the worst conditions the galaxy could imagine. Now I was standing in the middle of those conditions, on a planet called Korun Station 7, with a pack on my back and a jacket zipped up to my chin, because I had told him this would not be hard. Turns out, talking is easy. Standing in it is a different kind of easy, but it is still easy, if you grew up the way I did. Let me back up, just for a second, so you understand why I wasn't panicking. Ven is a Krilltok, 3 meters tall, gray-plated skin, 3 eyes that never blink at the same time, which means he is always watching you from at least 2 directions. He teaches survival theory, and he has a habit of reading disaster scenarios out loud, like he's reading a shopping list, flat and bored, because to him, these scenarios are horror stories, temperature swings that could kill a person in an hour, storms with lightning that strikes without warning, predators that hunt in packs and adapt to whatever you do to survive them, water that might be poison, ground that might not hold your weight. He calls these things impossible conditions, a phrase he uses so often that some cadets flinch when he says it. I did not flinch. I raised my hand and told him that what he was describing sounded a lot like an ordinary Monday back home. He did not believe me, so he sent me here, to prove I was either right or completely out of my mind. The truth is, both of those things can be true at once, and I was about to find out which one mattered more. The storm rolled closer, and I moved. Not toward shelter, not yet, but toward higher, drier ground. Because low ground floods fast, and I did not want to be standing in a river that didn't exist 20 minutes ago. My boots found a ridge of pale rock, and I climbed it, while the wind tried to peel my jacket off my shoulders. Lightning struck somewhere behind me, close enough that I felt it in my teeth. I kept climbing. There is a lesson my father taught me before I ever left Earth, back when I was 12 and terrified of a thunderstorm rattling our windows. He sat with me on the porch, both of us wrapped in a blanket, and he told me that the storm didn't care whether I was scared or brave. It was going to do what storms do either way. The only thing I got to choose was what I did while it happened. I could hide under a bed and wait for it to pass, or I could learn its shape, learn when it struck and where, and use that knowledge to move safely through a world that didn't owe me anything gentle. I reached the top of the ridge just as the rain started, and it wasn't rain exactly, more like the sky had decided to throw handfuls of ice at the ground. I pulled my hood tight and found a shallow gap between 2 boulders, enough to keep the worst of the wind off me, and I settled in to wait it out, counting the gap between light and sound, watching the storm's rhythm, the way I used to watch weather maps with my father, back when a thunderstorm was the biggest danger in my life. The wait gave me time to think about the rest of the list, because a storm was only item 1 of 7. Item 2 was gravity that shifted depending on where you stood, because Korun Station 7 had uneven mass beneath its crust, pockets of dense metal buried unevenly through the ground. Step onto the wrong patch of dirt, and suddenly you weighed 30% more, your knees buckling before you understood why. I had already crossed 2 of those patches on my way here, and both times, I adjusted my stride the same way I used to adjust for stairs that were a different height than I expected. A small stumble, a quick correction, nothing that stopped me. Item 3 was contaminated water, and I had a filter for that. The same kind of thinking that made my grandmother boil water from the tap out of habit, even after the city told her it was safe, because trust is something you earn slowly and lose in one bad afternoon. Item 4 was the creatures. I heard them before the storm had even fully passed, a low chattering sound coming from somewhere in the rocks below me, 3 notes repeated in a pattern too steady to be random. Vian's files called them Skarin, pack hunters about the size of a large dog, fast, coordinated, and smart enough to test a target's weaknesses before committing to an attack. The file said they adapted to whatever strategy their prey used against them, which made them dangerous to anyone who tried the same trick twice. I did not plan to try the same trick twice. I stayed still, breathing slow, and watched 3 shapes move along the rocks below, low to the ground, sniffing at the spot where I had crossed 20 minutes earlier. They were beautiful, actually, sleek and quick, moving like water finding the lowest path down a hill. I thought about the coyotes that used to wander through my neighborhood back home, slipping between houses at dawn, testing fences, learning which yards had loose gates and which ones didn't. We never fought them. We learned them. We changed our trash cans. We changed our routines. And eventually, most of the time, we just lived alongside them, each side a little wary of the other, both sides mostly fine. I didn't want to fight the Skarin either. Fighting was the last option on a very long list, the kind of choice you made only when every smarter option had already failed. So I reached into my pack and pulled out a strip of dried meat, meant for my own meals, and I tossed it downwind, away from my position, letting the smell drift toward them instead of toward me. It worked exactly like tossing a scrap of food toward a stray dog outside a diner back home. Curiosity beat caution. All 3 shapes turned and moved toward the scent, and I used the noise of their shuffling to slip further along the ridge, quiet, unhurried, putting distance between us without ever needing to run. Running invites chasing. I had learned that from every animal documentary I'd ever half-watched while eating breakfast, and from every warning my mother gave me about walking calmly past strange dogs instead of bolting. Calm feet, calm shoulders, eyes forward. It worked on Earth. It worked here too. By the time the sky cleared, I had put a kilometer between myself and the Skarin, and the storm had passed as fast as it arrived, leaving the ground steaming under a sun that felt almost gentle after everything it had just thrown at me. My monitor beeped, showing me the temperature climbing fast, the kind of swing that would have made most people dizzy. I just adjusted my jacket, rolled my sleeves, and kept walking toward the marker point Ven had given me before I left. A small transmitter 3 kilometers north, my actual goal for this exercise. I want to be honest here. Somewhere around kilometer 2, my legs started to ache in a way that had nothing to do with alien gravity and everything to do with the fact that I had been walking for hours on very little sleep. That part wasn't fun. That part felt exactly as hard as it should have felt. Surviving impossible conditions doesn't mean you don't get tired. It means you keep moving anyway. Because stopping doesn't make the conditions any less impossible. It just makes you an easier target for whatever comes next. I thought about school mornings back home, waking up at 5, riding a crowded train that smelled like coffee and wet umbrellas, changing lines twice, walking the last 6 blocks in whatever weather decided to show up that day, because the bus was late again, and waiting for it would make me later still. Nobody back home called that an impossible condition. We called it a commute. We complained about it, sure. We grumbled into our phones and told our friends how tired we were. But we did it, every single day, because the alternative was staying home and falling behind was its own kind of danger. I crossed a shallow stream, careful to test each stone before putting my full weight on it, because Vethan's file had mentioned a species of small biting insects that liked still water, and stagnant pools where the current pooled instead of flowing were the places they gathered thickest. I kept moving along the flowing parts instead, the same way I used to avoid puddles that looked too deep to guess the bottom of. Somewhere past the stream, the ground gave a soft groan beneath me, and I froze immediately. My monitor lit up red, warning me that I was standing on unstable earth, a hollow pocket that could collapse under sudden weight. I did not move fast. I did not panic. I lowered myself slowly, spreading my weight across my hands and knees, and crawled sideways until the ground felt solid again, the same trick I remembered from a hiking trip years earlier, when a ranger warned our group about a stretch of trail that had washed out underneath, without any visible sign on the surface. Slow and careful beats fast and sorry, every single time. Not long after the ground stopped groaning beneath me, I found a wide flat stretch of rock, dry and warm from the sun, and I allowed myself exactly 5 minutes to sit, because pushing a tired body past its limit was its own kind of danger. one that didn't show up on any monitor. I drank water from my filter, slow sips instead of gulps, the same way a coach once taught me during a long-distance run back home, when I learned the hard way that draining a bottle too fast only made your stomach cramp halfway through the next mile. While I sat, I checked the sky out of habit, scanning for another storm front building on the horizon, because VN's file had mentioned that weather on Korun Station 7 could roll in twice within a single day, and I had no interest in being caught in the open a second time without cover nearby. The sky stayed clear, at least for now, so I used the extra minutes to check my monitor readings against the map VN had given me before I left. There was a narrow pass ahead, cutting between two low hills, and the file had flagged it with a small warning symbol I didn't fully recognize. I zoomed in and read the note attached, something about loose gravel and a steep drop on one side, the kind of terrain that looked easy until your foot slipped on a patch of shifting stone. I thought of icy sidewalks back home in January, the kind that looked perfectly normal until your heel hit a hidden patch of black ice, and the whole world tilted sideways for half a second before you caught yourself. Or didn't. I decided to take the pass slowly, keeping close to the hillside instead of the open edge, letting my hand trail along the rock wall for balance, the way I used to hold a railing on icy steps. The pass took longer than I expected, careful step after careful step, testing each patch of gravel before trusting it with my full weight. But I came out the other side without a single slip, my knees a little sore, my patience thinner, but nothing worse than that. I allowed myself a small, private laugh once I cleared it, because somewhere back on Earth, this exact kind of caution had a name that had nothing to do with alien survival theory. We just called it walking carefully in winter, something every kid learns by the time they're 7 years old, usually after falling flat on their back in front of their whole class at least once. By the time I reached the marker point, the sun was beginning to dip low, casting long shadows across the rocks, and my whole body felt heavy in the good way, the way you feel after finishing something hard instead of avoiding it. I pressed my hand against the transmitter, and it beeped once, sending a signal back to the academy that I had completed the route. VN was waiting when the shuttle picked me up, standing at the edge of the landing pad with his 3 eyes, doing that thing where 2 watched me, and 1 watched something else entirely. I climbed down, tired, dusty, and grinning despite myself. He didn't say anything at first. He just looked at me for a long moment, the kind of look that made the other cadets nervous, but I had stopped being nervous around it weeks ago. Finally he spoke, and his voice was as flat as ever, though I like to think I heard something underneath it now, something close to curiosity. "You avoided the Scaran," he said. It was not a question. "I fed them a snack and walked away," I said. "Worked on the coyotes back home too." He tilted his head slightly. A gesture I had learned meant he was filing information away somewhere important. "You crossed the unstable ground without falling through," he continued. Slow and low,
I said.
"My knees remember every dumb trail I ever hiked as a kid. Turns out that memory is useful out here too." He was quiet again, longer this time, and I let him think, because I had learned that pushing him to speak faster only made him slower. Eventually he said, "The scenario was designed to be survived by a team of 6 trained cadets working together, with full equipment support and a rescue window of no more than 1 hour. You completed it alone, in 4 hours, with civilian-grade equipment, and you are smiling." I shrugged, though my shoulders ached with the movement. "Where I'm from, sir, most people don't get a team. Most people don't get a rescue window. Most people wake up, deal with whatever the day throws at them, and figure it out as they go. Because there isn't really another option. You learn to read a storm instead of hiding from it. You learn which animals want to fight you and which ones just want your sandwich. You learn the ground under your feet because nobody is coming to check it for you first." He turned toward the academy building, and I fell into step beside him, my legs protesting every stride, though I wasn't about to let him see that. "I am reclassifying Scenario 712, he said, as we walked. "It will no longer be listed under impossible conditions." "Good," I said. "What will you call it instead?" He paused at the entrance, his eyes doing their strange, staggered blink, and for a moment, I thought he might actually be enjoying this conversation. "Baseline," he said. "A starting point, not an ending one." That felt about right to me. Back home, the ground could shake under your feet without warning. The sky could turn violent in the space of an afternoon. The water wasn't always safe, and the animals weren't always friendly, and none of that stopped anyone from getting up the next morning and doing it all again. We didn't call it surviving. We called it living, because on Earth, living and surviving had always been close enough to the same thing that most people stopped bothering to tell them apart. The next week, Ven assigned Scenario 712 to the entire class, as a live field exercise, no longer a thought experiment, locked away in old files, but a real test every cadet would have to pass. The room did not take the news well. A boy named Oliver, who sat 2 seats to my left, turned pale enough that his freckles looked like they were floating on his face. A girl named Grace, who usually sat quiet in the back, started asking rapid questions about equipment allowances, her pen scratching notes faster than I had ever seen her write. I packed light, a jacket for the cold, a filter for the water, dried meat for distraction, and the same calm feet my mother taught me to walk with past strange dogs. I didn't need much else, because the conditions themselves hadn't changed. Only my classmates' understanding of them had. Grace found me before the exercise started, standing near the equipment lockers, her arms crossed tight against her chest. "Is it really that bad?" she asked. "Or were you exaggerating in class to make a point?" I thought about it honestly before answering, because she deserved an honest answer, not a comforting one. "It's real," I told her. "The storm is real. The ground is real. The animals are real. None of that is fake or softened. But it isn't unbeatable either. You just have to stop thinking about it as one giant impossible thing and start thinking about it as a list of smaller things you already know how to handle, one at a time. Cold, you dress for it. Ground, you test it before trusting it. Animals, you give them a reason to leave you alone instead of a reason to notice you. None of that is new. You already know how to do all of it. You've just never had to do it all in the same afternoon before." She didn't look fully convinced, but she nodded anyway, and when the exercise began, she moved through it slower than I had. More careful, more hesitant, but she made it, and that mattered more than her speed. By the end of the week, most of the class had made it through, some with a little help, a few requiring a short rescue when the storm hit harder than expected, but nobody failed in a way that couldn't be recovered from. Ven logged every result personally, and when he handed back our evaluations, mine had a note at the bottom, short, and typed in his usual flat style, though I liked to imagine there was something warmer hiding underneath the words, "if you looked closely enough." The note said, "Reference Planet Earth for future baseline comparisons." I kept that evaluation, folded small, tucked into the bottom of my bag, because it felt like the kind of thing worth holding on to. Not because it proved I was special, because I wasn't, not really. I was just one person from a planet that had never once made life easy for anybody living on it. A planet that shook and stormed and flooded and burned in different corners depending on the season. A planet where the water wasn't always safe, and the animals weren't always friendly, and the ground wasn't always solid. And somehow, across all of that, 8 billion people still woke up every single day and found a way to get to work anyway. Nobody back home ever told us the conditions were supposed to be impossible. We just grew up inside them, learned their rhythms the way you learn the creak of your own front door, and figured out how to move through the world without waiting for someone else to make it easier first. That, more than anything else, is what I tried to explain to Vehen, and to Grace, and to every cadet who looked at that list of conditions and felt their stomach drop. It was never about being fearless. I was scared plenty of times out there, standing under lightning that struck too close, crossing ground that groaned beneath my boots, listening to hunters chatter in the rocks below me. Fear never fully left. It just learned to sit quietly in the back seat while I kept driving forward, because stopping never once made anything easier, not on Koroon Station 7, and not back home either. Vuvian still lists conditions on the holoboard every week, still reads them out in that same flat, bored voice, still watches the room for reactions with 2 eyes, while the third stays fixed on something only he can see. But Scenario 712 carries a different label now, something closer to respect than warning, a small acknowledgement that somewhere out among the stars, there is a small blue planet full of people who never asked for easy, and built lives out of hard instead. one ordinary, complicated, storm-soaked morning at a time. And if you ever find yourself listing the worst conditions you can imagine, thinking no one could possibly survive them, just remember, somewhere on Earth, someone is already living through exactly that, checking the weather app, grabbing an umbrella, and heading out the door anyway. Because the bus doesn't wait, and neither does Monday.